Well, is it possible to have a free and fair election in the United States? Hearing that the feds are now preparing for civil unrest if a Trump victory happens in November. We're seeing the dust now settling from both major parties' conventions, the RNC and the DNC. And now, of course, the real sprint begins before the November election. Colonel Douglas Macgregor has just written a great new piece about how both of these parties have basically papered over the real problems in the United States. And as we often talk about here on this show, there is a uniparty, whether you want to believe it or not, in the United States. And Colonel Douglas Macgregor has said he doesn't believe we would have a free and fair election, maybe even an election at all, as we head into November. He said that for months now, and he joins us to talk about that and so much more. Colonel, great to see you. Welcome back to the show. Always great to have you here. I really enjoyed your new piece. What was the impetus for you to write this piece? And maybe you can give our audience a little understanding of the context there.
Well, I like a lot of Americans, watch both conventions. And, you watch because you hope that there will be some substance to them, that at some point real policy issues will be discussed. There will be some debates on the floor. People will vote a novel idea for or against a particular candidate. Of course, none of that happened. And both of these looked like staged events. There might as well have been college graduations, with the valedictorians have already been selected and everybody congratulates the valedictorian. We listen to the speech, which is largely boilerplate nonsense, and we walk away happy. Well, that essentially is what's happened. I don't think everybody's happy. I think a lot of Americans have real questions about the whole thing. Now, that's one of the reasons I wrote it. I'm sick of the glitz and glamour and would like some substance. Second reason is, and this is emphasized very recently by this man, Mohammed El-Arian. He gave an interview within the last 48 hours about the state of the economy. And he said something that's very interesting, which I tried to argue in the essay. He said the people in the United States that earn less than $50,000 a year, and you'd be surprised how large that population is in the United States right now. They have been suffering for some time the consequences of inflation and malpractice in Washington. But now the pain that they have been enduring is migrating upwards into the upper middle class and even to those who are now millionaires. In other words, the dramatic rise in the price of food, 21%. The dramatic rise in mortgage rates to 7%, the rise in rents, the rise in car loans being forfeited and cars being retaken by the owners, the dealers. All of this is coming together in a very bad way, but nobody during these conventions seemed to be remotely cognizant of it. And they made promises to everybody. We'll give you a better life. Low inflation, excuse me. Everything will be cheaper in the future than it is today. Of course, how do you do that? The president can't wave a magic wand and ensure that everybody does exactly what he wants. That's nonsense. And there are forces that really aren't in our control economically. And so this business of migrating upwards means that the economic pain, is being felt more broadly than just at the lower end of the spectrum. This also signals this imminent decline of the United States in terms of economic prosperity and standard of living. Now, you put that together with this bellicose foreign policy that has tried desperately to start a war with Russia over the last 2.5 years. You add to it now the determination in Israel and with Mr. Netanyahu to start a major regional war in the Middle East. And you see that in response to his demands, we've moved more than half the United States Navy over there, along with a substantial portion, if not most, of the United States Air Force's capabilities. So we're poised. We're ready. We're ready to pull the trigger. What happens when you combine the economic fragility of the country with wars that we have no business fighting and are unlikely to win outright? And then lastly, there's this issue of social cohesion. And this is something nobody talks about. Everybody takes it for granted that, we're solid, we're great. No, we're not. How many people inside the United States describe themselves simply as Americans versus the numbers of people that describe themselves as something else first and then American. And beyond that, we have millions and millions and millions, over 50 million people who were not born in this country inside the United States. So social cohesion, which is really the foundation for everything you do in a society, is at an all-time low. This, to me, spells imminent disaster. And yet nobody wants to address it. The intelligent move would be retrenchment, pull back, make peace, you fools, and start focusing on the United States, secure your borders, restore the rule of law. That's how you reinforce national identity. That's how you rebuild your society. What are we doing? The opposite.
What do you make of these reports that the federal government, state and local governments are preparing for massive civil unrest in the United States?
I think they probably are. And I think a certain amount of civil unrest is unavoidable. The only difference between my views of this civil unrest and others is that others think in terms of a civil war. I don't see it as a civil war. What I see is essentially the cities, the large urban areas populated by people who are comfortable with this current government. And then the rest of the country, once you move outside these large cities, which are hardcore support structures for the left, you find the rest of the American people. These are the people that say, no, I don't like this. I'm not profiting. I'm not benefiting. I don't want to live under the control of these populations. And unfortunately, when you look at elections and fraudulent voting, which is practically institutionalized now in at least half the states, where does it happen? It happens in those urban areas. If you think you're going to go into Philadelphia, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and impose legal standards in accordance with the rule of law for voting, you're out of your mind.
I mean, it's laughable.
Dallas and Houston are the same way, and New Orleans. I mean, come on, it's crazy.
It's laughable. I mean, I almost laugh out loud. If you were to ask most Americans, do you think you're going to get a free and fair election in Philadelphia? For crying out loud, the amount of corruption. I mean, look, that's my home city, you know. But Chicago. I mean, you take your pick. To your point, I don't think any American believes that there'd be free and fair elections in those cities at all. It's terrifying. And you've said, you know, we were not going to have free and fair elections as we head into this fall. What do you anticipate is going to happen on Election Day? I mean, the early voting starts, I mean, it's imminent.
It's already begun, hasn't it? In some areas, I don't know.
In some areas, they've done.
Yeah, listen, this is crazy nonsense. The Uniparty has done everything in its power to undermine the legality of voting, to make voting a joke. I think it was several years ago when Trump was actually elected, I listened to someone get on the radio, and he said he was in Alexandria, Virginia, and he was a Russian visiting the United States, either Russian or Ukrainian, I can't remember which. And he pointed out that he had voted in the election.
What?
And somebody said, well, how did you do that? He said, well, you know, he spoke excellent English. He said, I walked in, I said, this is where I live. I have a driver's license. Okay, you're good. And I think we're going to see a repetition of this nonsense. And of course, he was appalled. He couldn't believe it. And he said, you Americans are allowing foreigners, people with no ties to your country whatsoever, to decide the outcome of these elections. Why would you do that? Doesn't make any sense. He thought we were nuts. Well, he was quite correct in 2016. I don't see that anything there has really changed. And I don't see any evidence that anybody in Washington desperately wants to change it. Because again, what does Washington not want? It does not want any disruption in the flow of money. And their answer to every challenge is we'll print more money. And their fervent belief is that since our dollar is the reserve currency, we can do this in perpetuity. So you put all of that together, and I think what we're going to see on 5 November in many places in the United States, large numbers of American citizens are going to go to the polling places. And they're going to watch and they're going to see all of these non-citizens show up to vote. And they're going to intervene and say, wait a minute, this man's not a citizen. And of course, the polling officials in some areas will say, well, this is none of your affair. Get out of here. You know, we determine who can vote. And someone will probably hold up the Constitution. For instance, in the state of Florida, in most states, it says, you must be a citizen of the United States to vote in the election. But even in Florida, there are many areas where no one's citizenship is ever questioned or tested. So I guess my big frustration right now are all these celebrations of, we're going to sweep Trump back into office and then everything will be better. These people are delusional. And then you have on the left, you have this crowd that says, well, go ahead, do what you want. It's not going to make any difference. And I found this statement by this retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Vintman, who became a celebrity when he testified against Donald Trump back in under the last administration in connection with all this Russiagate nonsense. And he said, well, I guess it's Mr. Durov, the Russian who founded and operates Telegram, was arrested in Paris. And he said, well, I guess Mr. Durov is an object lesson, effectively what he was implying. And Mr. Elon Musk had better watch out, or he could end up like Mr. Durov. And this tells me that you have on the left again something which I saw back in 2020, this very smug, arrogant view that it doesn't make any difference what you do, we are going to win. And I remember Nancy Pelosi saying, oh, Donald Trump has no chance of winning. It doesn't matter what he does. A dead man could defeat Donald Trump. Well, I think she was practically right, wasn't she?
Right.
So I'm wondering if we're not seeing more and more evidence of the same arrogance and smugness that we saw back in 2020 right now. And I keep asking Americans to wake up and look at this squarely in the eye, understand what's happening. And maybe we will, maybe we won't. Maybe we'll have to go through this and find out the hard way.
That it's rigged, right? I mean, you have 100 million Americans who don't vote. They don't vote for a reason. They think both parties are corrupt, as we do here on this show. I won't speak for you, but I certainly.
But Clayton, you're wrong. More people voted in the last election for President Biden than ever in history. Right. And gosh, more people voted than are registered to vote. Gosh, that was a great victory. He won more votes than Barack Obama.
It's amazing. It's really historic. We're living in historic times. I agree with you, and I think there's this. I think as Americans we want to be optimistic, and I think we want to be hopeful. I'm a glass half full kind of person, and I want to be optimistic and hopeful. And you hear this soaring rhetoric. You see Robert F. Kennedy Jr. coming out on stage with President Trump and everyone on the right. I saw Twitter sort of explode this weekend with all of those conservative commentators who love Trump, and they said this is game over for Kamala Harris. The swamp better get ready to be fully drained. This is a new era in America, and I get their optimism. Do you buy it though? Clearly not, right?
Well, no, I'm very skeptical. I mean, first of all, I think both men are good, decent human beings with the best of intentions. Let me state that right up front. I'm not for demonizing anybody, and I think that's the case. That Donald Trump's intentions, as far as I could tell, when I worked for him and when I saw him in power, were always pure. The problem was that most of the people around him had very different ideas. They had a different agenda, and they routinely subverted him. I see most of those same people back again. So whatever Donald Trump says or wants, I'm not sure how profoundly important that is to the people running the show behind the scenes. And then there's RFK Jr., who brings a new dimension to this, which is a very positive thing in my judgment for the right. And that is that he's saying, look, the pharmaceutical industries, all the big lobbies in agriculture, all of these things have to be taken on. We've got to regain control of our health, regain control of the whole system that is poisoning our children and ruining our lives. He's absolutely right. I'm 100% for it. And he signed on with President Trump absolutely to stop, this nonsense with Russia. However, they've all run silent on the Middle East.
Right.
Why is
right?
That? I think we know.
We've seen RFK Jr.'s about face on the Middle East. That was, I think, a big shock to a lot of people. How did he suddenly turn a 180? Like, what sort of dirt is there? I mean, why? Why suddenly this big flip? And Americans,
well, there are a lot of us that were pro-Israel. I mean, I've always been very supportive of the Israeli state, and they've had trouble coming to terms with the reality that this war has nothing in common with previous wars. It really doesn't. That what began on the basis of what happened on the 7th of October was an attempt to retaliate on some scale to induce or reintroduce or restore deterrence. Well, first of all, we've got a lot of questions now about what happened on the 7th of October. That no longer looks like a pristine example of an attack that was launched as a pure surprise, and everybody was overwhelmed and overtaken. That's part of the problem. But this thing has become an exercise in mass expulsion and killing of the population of Gaza, with the long-term goal of cleansing everything between the quote-unquote river and the sea of Palestinian Arabs. This is not something I think most Americans would sign on for. And I think that was evident, certainly at the Democratic convention, but anybody who raised their hands about it was sort of shoved aside. There were plenty of people on the Republican side that wanted to essentially distance themselves, but couldn't do it, to the point where the Republican Party looks like the party of Israel. And, it's now Israel first. I mean, it was plastered on the walls.
Right.
Kind of astonishing. I've never seen a foreign flag at a political convention like that in my life. Maybe somebody else has, but I don't remember Cuban flags or Venezuelan flags or French flags or other kinds of flags showing up at a convention and everybody saying, oh, that's great, that's fine. And I don't think a lot of people were comfortable with that. Then on the other side, you have this other wing of the uniparty, if you will. You have Harris, who comes out of nowhere, couldn't win an election to save her life, was totally uncompetitive, and now suddenly is welcomed as the second coming. And everybody's supposed to get into line. And she says, well, we're the party of color. We're supporting everyone who isn't white. But she's got a problem. What is she telling all of the people that are appalled and disgusted by what's happening in Gaza? What does she do about all the people that are objecting to the mass killing and expulsion of human beings from Gaza? Well, these are explosive issues. No one will touch them. But if we don't touch them, they will explode, Clayton, in ways that are bad. That's the problem. So I thought, well, I'll write this and try to promote the idea that we should dig deeper and ask harder questions. The only thing I didn't put into that I now fervently believe more than ever is that we need another party, because there is no bifurcation per se anymore. Ultimately, both parties are controlled by the same sort of conglomerate. What is it? The 750 billionaires, all of whom increased their wealth since when, over the last several years under Biden, by 13 or 14 or 15 trillion. It's insane. Yeah. I don't know what number of those billionaires are running things, but they're running both parties. We've got to have a new party that is not hostage to oligarchs, that actually represents the American people. Because I still think you can unite people across party lines around specific issues. But none of those issues were really addressed in a forthright way. The only one, potentially by Trump, on the border. That's clear. But there are plenty of Democrats that think the border should be closed too. But you can't say that in the Democratic Party. But there are a lot of people on both parties that have said, what are we doing in Ukraine? What are we doing in the Middle East? This is insane. We're essentially cocking this gun and making it ready to fire and to drag us up to the nuclear level if we're not careful. And it's game over. It's just insane.
Where can people read your latest piece? Is it on the AmericanConservative.com? Is that right?
Yeah, it's in the American Conservative. And I would encourage people to look at it. It's not, I didn't write prescriptions. I was trying to get people to say, look where we are. Look what's happening. Who's offering a path out of this? That's the question. I don't see either party is offering a way out of this mess.
I don't either. People get angry with us when we talk about the uniparty here on the show, but it's the truth. And I hope people wake up to it. I hope you'll read Colonel Macgregor's great new piece. We'll have it linked up in the show description as well. And I hope people are paying attention, because we absolutely need a change in this country. We're heading for absolute disaster. on multiple levels, not to mention the $35 trillion in debt, the rise of the BRICS currency, the decline of the U.S. dollar, wide open borders and inflation. I mean, the list is pretty endless right now, and no one seems to be in the kitchen fixing this thing. Colonel, great to see you as always. Thank you so much for your perspective.
Thank you, Clayton. Bye-bye.